Okay, let's see. Is everyone let in, Patrick?
Yep.
Great. Okay, I will call to order the ADR meeting of April 20th. Welcome, everybody. For those of you that are not familiar with the process here, once we get to the agenda items, the town will present an agenda item, then the owners and/or their team will give any explanation they want. We will ask questions of them. We will then open it up to the public, and at the end, bring it back to the ADR for recommendations to the town council. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes of March 16th. I have read those and they seem fine to me. Does anyone else on the ADR want to okay those? Second that, or has no one read them yet? Should we wait?
No, I was not in attendance, so I'm out.
Stephen, Mark, Laura?
I can second that, Mark.
Okay, great. So before we go further and do the open time for public comments, we will quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Mark Kruchnit, ADR member and current chair.
Mark Fritz, ADR member.
Joey Buckingham, ADR member.
Laura Dewar, ADR member.
And Steven Sutra.
Great, thank you, everyone. Now, if anyone has any public comments on an item not on the agenda tonight, you can speak now for up to 3 minutes per California state regulations. And if we have no takers, we can move on to our first planning application, which is 11 Morrison Road. Patrick, will you be presenting that?
That's correct. I am covering for Matthew
Okay.
this week. He's on vacation. He picked the our most full agenda of the year. So I will start the slideshow and share my screen. Okay. So Chair Kruchnit and members of the ADR group, the first item before you is a proposal for 11 Morrison Road. The parcel is a large parcel. It's around 67,000 square feet. It's also a hillside lot, and there's an existing non-conforming for floor area house on the property. And the plan is a full demo and rebuild. So the existing house would be demolished. A new one would be built in its place, maintaining the existing non-conforming floor area, I believe. And this would include a new residence, a new detached accessory dwelling unit, as well as a pool, driveway and landscaping, and other improvements on the lot. As I mentioned, it is a hillside lot, so the bulk and mass of the house and the ADU will be broken up as in step with the hillside. The pool is located towards the lower level of the house, and the ADU, in conversations with the planning department, has been separated from the main part of the house so that it's a separate, distinct structure. Even though they are linked together as you move up the hillside. But in an effort to reduce that feeling of multiple stories and really make it two distinct kind of separate buildings on the hillside. So here are some renderings and some color and materials that were provided by the architect for what's being proposed. And as I mentioned, the pool and the ADU would be located at the lower level of the property, whereas the primary residence would be up towards the driveway access. Of course, there's a landscaping plan associated with it. It'll be consistent with our design guidelines as well as our hillside ordinance for appropriate screening, as well as any kind of sound attenuation. They're also working with the Ross Valley Fire Department to make sure that there's a vegetation management plan that is consistent with the fire department standards before we take this to final design review, so that the landscaping plan is not going to change down the road, which is an issue that we've had in the past. There was one public comment that was shared with the ADR group on this project. It was in support of the project, but also in support of the town repaving Morrison Road. So that's been passed along to our Public Works Director. And with that, staff recommends that the ADR group discuss the merits of the project and provide a formal recommendation to the town council for design review. And that concludes staff's presentation. I would ask if the applicant is present, if you could raise your hand if you'd like to provide any.
Yeah, hi, my name is Matthias Deutsch. Thank you for having me. I'm the architect, so the official applicant is actually David Gordon is the contractor, but I'm the architect in the project. I've worked closely with him. And yeah, thank you for having me or showing this project also to the public and reviewing the project. I can give you a little bit the story behind it. There's an existing house on site built in the 40s that the client, who is a long-term resident, would like to remove. There are also three shed structures on the site, which I labeled shed 1, 2, and 3. So those shed structures, 2 of those plus the carport, are allowed into the area calculation, which add up to 4,212 square feet. So the client wanted a house that has soft curves, rounds, lots of glass, contemporary feeling. It settles into the landscape very well, that respects the trees on site. We have some really nice oak trees on site that she would like to keep as much as possible. The program also has an ADU in it and a natural swimming pool. So it's not your classic blue sort of pool, but it's a natural pool with a sort of sandy bottom and a regenerative zone. So landscape is extremely important to her as well, and that everything nestles well into the site. So we pretty much used 3/4 of last year to really design this project. And as you can see from the drawings, especially the sections, the big challenge in this was to make this project make these programmatic parts connect pretty well. We have about a 46-foot drop between the current house, where it's situated at around 300 feet, to the location of a sort of a grassy flat at the bottom of the site, where you have shed number 3. And there's a kidney pool currently in between that was obviously graded over when it was installed. So we decided to bring in a way to overcome that sort of height differential between both areas, the most western and eastern part of the site. We're bringing down the location of the new proposed building by around 6 feet, and we're bringing up the site on the other side, on the western end, by about 5 feet. So everything is sort of graded towards each other a little bit, and then the house steps down in multiple steps down the side. And it also steps back with a garage in plan. So we made sure that we didn't have too much of a massing of the house in appearance. And in fact, as you look at the section, you would see that the house kind of fits into the current envelope of the house, of the existing house. So we've tried to make it work as much as possible, respect the trees, in fact, sort of celebrate the idea of the oak trees. We're preserving tree number 1. Which is a very sort of stately oak tree right at the entrance of the building. And we're building our driveway around it. And we're adding a parking lot towards the northern end of it, which was meant to also take care of a lot of traffic. If you've been up to this site, you'll probably see arborists, landscape designers, architects, service staff constantly parking on Morrison Road. And so what we are providing is an extra parking space for that, which is sort of situated behind the house, behind the garage entry. But I'm here for any questions. I'm happy to walk through further through the project with you and answer any of your questions. So that's my introduction. Yeah. Do you want to go over the plans, or I mean, I've not worked in Ross before. I'm local to San Francisco, so I've worked in various jurisdictions around the Bay Area, and so it's been quite a pleasure to work here in Ross on this project.
Well, thank you, Matthias. If you have anything else, do you want to say, you can continue. Otherwise, I will just open it up to the ADR members for questions about the project.
Yeah, go ahead. Just
Okay.
ask away.
Do any of you have questions?
I think it might be actually helpful for him to walk through the project, just quickly through the plans and the sections and just how it's all laid out. I don't know how the rest of you feel. I understand it, but I would like to know your thinking behind it. And I also would like to know how you are addressing the hillside lot ordinance floor area of 2816 versus what you're actually building at 4209. Like, what was your thinking behind not complying with the hillside lot ordinance FAR? Is there something I'm missing here?
Yeah, so we are entitled to using their all the structures on site actually as built account to 4,290 square feet. So per assessor's record, we are entitled through a non-conforming permit to a total of 4,212 square feet. We're below that by a few square feet. So when you take the 2 shed structures plus the garage and the existing building, to which has been unfortunately added, but is common over the decades illegally, we get to the assessor's record allows us the 4,212 square feet, and that's
so it's existing non-conforming. That's kind of your argument. Okay.
Yeah. So that's how we came up with it. And yeah, I'd be very happy to walk over this project. I think a good sheet would be to start with the existing site plan. And I don't know if we can put that on screen or.
And I think Matthias, this is Stephen. I think it would be helpful if you could orient us with the site plan a little bit, but then I think we could jump to mostly the section and then particularly the exterior elevations. You know, care less about your choices about interior configuration and more about kind of the volume as it presents to the outward world.
Sounds good.
Agreed.
Should I share? Let's see if I can do this. Can I share my drawing here? Let's see. All right, here we go. I think, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
all right,
yes,
excellent. So I'll give you a quick background. Here's the existing house. It's a standard sort of wood frame construction. It's got a little carport to it. You see the shed down here at the bottom of the hill and the other 2 shed structures. Let's go to the site plan. Here's the site plan. Morrison Road winds up the hill and it continues up here. And it's got a little access here to the house, which is very narrow. I'm going to zoom in. Here's tree number 1, sort of a stately, nice oak tree. There's some more oak trees around here. You come and you have a carport, you come into the residence, and then you'd step down to this patio. There's a little shed. This is not labeled, but that's shed number 1. This is shed number 2. And down the hill, you have shed number 3, and there's this kidney pool in between with a concrete patio. So orientation is obviously up, north is up, upper right is north. This is a very narrow driveway. So that was the first problem. And as you can see, the tree number 1 actually even straddles that driveway halfway. It's very uncomfortable to drive down and back. You have to back up again. And it's obviously against all fire code standards. So what we're doing is we're pretty much, and also very important, obviously, setback area, 45 feet from the side property line, 45 feet from the southern property line right here. Then we have an easement here along centered around Morrison Street, Morrison Road. And so we have to take 15 feet in both directions, a 30-foot easement, 25 feet in. So you see this narrow kind of envelope that we can build within. I'm going to flip right now to the plan as proposed. So we're sitting exactly within this easement. So we're not overstepping the easement anywhere. We're going pretty much right to it on this side here on the north side. So a new driveway is proposed. Morrison Road has sort of this larger opening here. There is a driveway down to the neighbor here, and Morrison Road keeps going up. There's a driveway to 10 Morrison Road, and we're proposing this new one. The trees that are being removed here are all bay leaf trees, so they're actually undesirable. So there's a lot of, per arborist report, there are trees that really are not going to be important. In fact, they're sort of a certain fire danger to the area. What we're preserving again is tree number 1, and so we're building our driveway around it. Driveway is 18 feet, 16 feet is the minimum for a fire lane driveway. And the double lines you see here are retaining walls. It's a fairly steep terrain here. The site is flanked also by these drop-offs on both sides, on the north and on the southern area. So you really have this sort of tongue here. You have this sort of a crest upon which you can build. So we're kind of really replacing in concept the footprint of the existing house with a new footprint of a new building. Overall, it's an L shape. You approach this sort of turn. It's not a turnaround. It's a multi-point turnaround. There's no way to build a regular turnaround anywhere in these hills. So you approach the garage. It is a direct approach. We try to make the garage as good looking as possible. That was always a comment, like you basically approach right to the garage, but you're flanked by this tree and obviously by the residence. And you can keep going to the back, and that's where we're hoping that some of the sort of landscape staff and so on will use that parking lot rather than Morrison Road. That should relieve Morrison Road. And the language, my design directive in the beginning was the client really wanted curves, and we started with sort of more amorphous kind of designs. And as we designed it over the time, we realized we wanted we still wanted curves, but a bit more restrained, sort of geometrically sincere system, a concept of design. And so we came up with more a variation on the circle with quarter circles, half circles, circles, rotundas that then pleased the client that she liked this sort of overall layout. So the curves are shown in plan. We have them in a larger patio that sort of curves around here. You can imagine that the views are pretty spectacular from this main residence over here towards Mount Tam. And then the integration of the natural pool obviously is at the bottom of the hill, where currently you have a grassy flat, which we're grading up a little bit. And then the ADU is another element that sits here and becomes part of the overall stepping of the building. I have everything is in Model 3D. You can see it if you want to. I can give you a fly through where we took the entire hill into the model. But what helps is a little bit I try to give you some idea of what's going on with some of the renderings. So the existing, we took some drone shots actually. So here's our existing building, and you can see the orange tape, the orange fencing that shows the perimeter sort of the new building, of the proposed building. And so the exact same, but photoshopped, obviously, building proposal is shown here. You have the driveway coming in behind the building and then into this parking lot. The idea is that these retaining walls obviously are going to be well vegetated and sort of more disappear. At the moment, we're showing more of these sort of open, in their stone walls, vegetated retaining walls. The building has a fairly large glass facade here, and towards the base of the building, which this is level 2, and then level below it becomes more solid. It's sitting sort of on a stone plinth. So everything is sort of grounded in the building, and it steps down the hill. I have another closer vantage point as we designed so here's a good one too. That's literally the same drone shot. You see the building. It's has the side staking and the story poles. And around this area is where the main building was. And it has one element that's unusual that got a little bit of pushback, I would say, in the beginning from planning. We have an elevated dining room. So the dining room sits actually on these columns. It thereby making space for the level 2 patio to run underneath, and even these retaining walls to kind of come underneath. There's a little bit of a water feature here. There's a patio there. The client very much likes trees, so this is a bit in memoriam of the tree number 14. There's an oak that we need to remove, an oak tree, and it's this sort of idea of a bit of a folly and a little bit of a tree house, which is sort of docks onto the main building. And that's an element that we are aware is a bit unusual, but my client didn't want usual. He wants not the most conventional, but something that stands out a little bit, that has a bit of a fun side to it, a different side to it. And so this is the one element that we're doing that probably stands out the most from this design. And it's this dining room. And here is the existing site. I try to do this as accurate as possible. There's a tree, an oak tree that will be staying in place, that we're preserving. But this one oak tree here, which we were hoping to actually let that grow from below and underneath this tree house, but we would have to, it's really tree, it has 3 trunks. So it's a tripod in some ways. And we would have to remove 2, and according to our arborist, that would not look good for the tree in terms of survival. So I can walk you a little bit through I'll walk you through the floor plans if you like. I have a sheet that shows them all combined. Maybe I should start with the top level. That's the easiest. Oh, so here's.
If I could just interrupt real quickly, this is Mark. I maybe the floor plans aren't the most interesting. Next piece sections, as Stephen mentioned, would be the more appropriate piece. So, I think we've all read the plans themselves, unless you hear someone arguing differently on the board. But I think the site section is where we're going to have the most conversation, is my guess.
Okay.
Exactly.
Let me go through that with you here. I made this is interesting because we obviously want to stay within the envelope, within the height limits, and we want to make sure also we don't trigger in any way any story count or such. So I made a comparison. This is taken from the same model. This is a site section. There are 3 sections that I cut. This is the existing house, obviously, on the left side. And you see the sections here in plan. One is taken at the northern side, one at the southern, and one actually at this location, which is sort of the center of the building. We have a tunnel that we have an elevator that goes down to a tunnel that connects better to the lower part of the site. So the sections show you what the house is doing. The northern section here, you can see actually pretty well. So I marked them in green. The northern section is green. Here you see the dashed line of the green section. This is where you see very clearly how the existing house sits about 6 feet higher. So we're sinking the new proposed house a little bit lower. And if you go down to the middle section where the elevator is, you see pretty well how we're staying within the envelope of the existing house, here shown in black dashed section. And this magenta section is the current section of the existing house at that same location. And then if we look at the northern side, here again on the left, the red section, north cut of the existing building, literally brought over to our proposed house. And this is the proposed section. So we're staying sort of within the same envelope, which was our goal, that we're not disrupting too much of the existing massing. And we, of course, believe we're doing a better massing because the current house, this has one big old facade that drops down to this pool area. And we're stepping the proposed house. I have a larger section here that shows you all of these sections combined, just to confuse you completely, is here are the sections that also show you the height that we're within the height envelope. I'm not exactly sure how height is determined in Ross. I know you could use one of the section areas, so that's why I'm providing you with multiple sections, and I'm just basically offsetting them or copying up 30 feet. So you see the existing house is not going above that section and staying within the same envelope. What you can see pretty well from the section 2 is obviously the sort of curvilinear roof. We have sort of two waves. We have sort of the green wave and the blue wave. We have a green roof. That's top of the house. That's the main building. And then we have the garage has another sort of curve. That's the idea is that seen from above as well, the house will be pleasant and won't disturb neighbors too much. So I think we have views of that, but I think you're familiar with it and you've seen that design. So I mean, I can open it up to questions if you have anything at the moment. There's one more element maybe I should let you know. As I mentioned, my clients very much likes sort of the idea of a tree house and gazebo. So we're also adding a small gazebo towards the end. It's not so small, it's fairly high there, but it's a very open gazebo towards the end, which goes off with a bridge from the pool deck and sort of terminates this whole ensemble of buildings that are stepping down the hill. So yeah, I think that covers most of it. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Matthias,
Go
just,
ahead.
oh, sorry, just going back to that gazebo for a second. How high is the structure? And then how high is the top of the structure from the ground? Like from floor to ceiling, how high is it? And then how high is it in total?
The total is we're to the last or outermost rafter. We're below 30 feet. That was important that we stayed within the 30 feet limit. And the gazebo itself isn't terribly high. I have to the sort of top plate, it's 8'4" and it's completely open. It's sort of a trellis gazebo. It's and I must admit it's not fully designed in terms of details, but it's another round basically. So it's a very open structure. And
Does it have lighting in it? Does it have electrical?
no plan on lighting. I can see that concern. There's we don't want to put a big torch into the hills. No, there's no lighting plan. I think this is more like a daytime kind of situation. So it's a very open, it's more I think a garden structure.
Do you have any studies that show what the neighbor on the dining room side can see of the dining room?
Yes, and let's see. So you're talking about this neighbor?
Yes.
So there are still some fairly large trees over here.
Got it.
I have, yeah, it's never been a concern. Let's see, the neighbor is very supportive of it, but obviously it's a good point because some trees will be removed. Yes. I'm looking at, there's another study I made, by the way, here. Found it interesting. We had a comment from planning beginning that there was a massing concern. And we made a study regarding the massing and the frontages of existing buildings around contextually. And we're actually at 95 feet, one of the smallest frontages. You see about 137, 155 and so on. So good point there, Josefa. I think there is a lot of vegetation that's still on the neighbor's side, and we are removing we're removing tree number 14 here for sure. So, but we'd be happy to look into that if that was any concern. So what happens is one thing, the dining room does not have a here's the situation. It is unusual. Our dining room does not face there's a round bullseye sort of window which is more ornamental at the end, which faces that sort of neighbor's direction, but other than that, it has only window that faces the basically the west, and it, again, tree number 14 is sort of around here. Obviously, I'm not showing it in the rendering. For that, it would be better to look at one of these pictures. And I think this would be here to the right is
Yeah.
the neighbor. So I think there's still sufficient trees.
Right, okay, that answers my question.
Yeah. I think
How
that-
about cut and fill? I couldn't find that on here for the whole
Yeah.
project.
there is a substantial cut and fill. And so we have it, it's not, and then we have 1,300 cubic yard. Let's see, is it not on there? Okay, we need to look at the civil drawings, and they are, so this is the challenging part of this side. We wanted to stay, obviously here are the civil drawings. The because we're lowering the building, but we are, on the other hand, we're also bringing up the topography on the western end. We're cutting into the hill, which follows the guidelines of the city, which is we're bringing in within the envelope of the existing building. We're not going over 30 feet and so on. And that is all of a real benefit. So we made the calculation, we can keep the building or bring it up by 3 feet, then we're running into the danger of having a higher building and having the dining room higher and more exposure again. So the calculation literally was like, okay, we're going to have more cut and fill, more offsite removal than what is normal or would be desirable. Ideally, we're looking into other possibilities of keeping some of the fill on site, but some of the fill is simply not, must be removed. For example, we have that kidney pool, and there's concrete and so on that's going on that we need to remove from the site. So we made that calculation. We said, okay, we know it's going to be off-site removal of fill from the site, but that to us is a short-term detrimental effect as opposed to the long-term positive effect of a building that's more nestled and deeper into the hill.
Okay.
So that's why we made that
Got
decision.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the civil drawings are here as well.
Yeah, C 2.0. I just missed it.
Yeah. And part of it is also simply a driveway that is code compliant, especially for the fire department. We have a completely non-code compliant driveway, and adding the parking lot certainly adds to it as well. We would love to do, for example, I'll give you one on the area. We were thinking of doing the pool deck as a fill. That would have introduced another probably double set of 6-foot retaining walls. And we have a very precious oak tree that we want to contain or keep here. So we're doing only a minor fill. We're grading slightly up, and then the pool deck itself is going to be sort of a more an Ipe post and beam sort of type pool deck. So it's again, it's a trade-off. Sometimes it's a lose-lose. You're not, you're no good deed gets unpunished. You try to do the best, and you do more. For example, if we left the if we brought up the building higher or left it more at the 300-foot elevation, we'd have to do more retaining walls at the bottom. So it's sort of a choice. You either do it here or there. So we found that the 6-foot grading down was sort of a sweet spot where I could locate the building in a good position that still made the driveway very sort of slope the driveway in a way that these retaining walls here weren't too high next to this access path, which goes down the side as an existing access path, and that also can access the ADU here. So by bringing down this driveway a little bit more than just the 3 feet, for example, or leave it maybe at the same height as the current building, we'd have pretty massive retaining walls on this side. So it's that trade-off to find the right place within the topography where the building works well, where it's nestled in right, where we're actually still, we feel pretty good that we're keeping it within the envelope of the existing building. So that took me a while to to figure out the right stepping of the building, and even work with the ADU is another step down, sort of to the towards the pool area. There's a lot of program in a limited site, but it's we feel it's working pretty well at this point. And so yeah, we'll have some fill actually here at the parking lot. This is where we introduce retaining walls, so we can get some fill in there, and there's some fill that can be definitely filled in here on this on the driveway side.
Can you take a minute to describe public or let's say access to the ADU that isn't through the primary unit? If you're a true sort of ADU, how does that operate?
Yeah, there's currently an existing path. We call it it's sort of a we're repaving. We want to do some resurfacing that makes it a little nicer to travel down. There's an existing path along the side here. It's actually quite a pleasant path, but it has a steeper area up here. And what we want to introduce, I think that's more on the landscape side. We have some newer materials that are going in. I'd have to find that one.
It's okay to not show me the landscape. It's you're proposing access to the ADU from that path, that sort of existing path on the southern portion of the site.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that will be the access. I mean, in reality, this will probably be used by a family too, which is or staff could move in there as well. But like, it's nice to have obviously an access that is separate. There will be a separate. We're proposing here this on the side. We're proposing its own. Obviously, it needs its own house number. It'll have its own post box here. We want to integrate that into a sort of a little, what I call it, a stone pillar that's with an internally illuminated house number as well. So this is the access down to the road. As you can see, yeah, it goes up to, I have a 26.46% grade. So it's a little steeper on some areas. That's why we were thinking we're going to put some form of permeable resurfacing on it. And maybe in some areas we even introduce some of these steps. You see that sometimes in areas like in San Francisco where it's even the sidewalk gets really steep, you have some steps integrated. So we make it in a way that this is still accessible and that it's not a slippery path or anything like that. And then as you come down to it, you have a drop off. The idea is even that maybe an ATV vehicle, some sort of a golf cart vehicle could drive down there. Currently, actually, trucks can drive down there. The contractor has been down there, and I don't know how he does it. He does it, and to service some of the area. So that is possible. And then there's a little bridge to this sort of piazza, this opening here, and then you can access the ADU here. So yeah.
Can you access the ADU from that parking lot at all, or is that just totally separate?
You would have to go, well, you would have to actually go here. There's another way. There is a step, we have these steps that go below this bridge of the dining room onto level 2 patio, and then they step down here, and you can step down here to the ADU. So the access path, there are really two ways of getting, and you could, if technically, I mean, if you were a family, you could go through the building, you can take the elevator down, and you also come down out of here, and then you would walk down to here. So they're like 3 paths, and actually, well, really 4 actually, if you wanted. There's a staircase here that drops you out here as well, and then gets you down there. So the access to the side was quite a challenge because of the terrain differential, but I think it's at this point it works pretty well, and it becomes sort of a procession through the building, through the site, and you experience various water elements as you go through there. And the renderings show that pretty well too.
Does anyone else on the ADR have more questions?
I have one question, which is I saw that there was a sample of lattice on the materials board. Did I see that correctly? Where is that? Can you show us that sample?
Yeah.
Where's that plan?
Okay, so it's here, and it is literally to contain this or to close up this area from critters or anything like that. We could see how this becomes sort of like a green wall here, and the lattice is really only just sort of a medium to contain that area. It could be open whether we use it or not, but it was sort of an idea that we want to make sure this isn't sort of a dark, damp area underneath. So this is the part that I spoke of earlier. We had thought of putting retaining wall in here, but it's getting beyond 6 feet. So it would be a double retaining wall. And the problem again is here is an oak tree that we want to preserve. And so short of, let's say, sort of spanning across that with a retaining wall, which one can do, but it's another big sort of endeavor. So we decided we'll make this an epay deck that is post and beam structure. And so the lattice is right here in front of it.
Okay.
Other than that, it's not used anywhere. The primary materials are sort of these. We have the stone, we have the Napa Sire Ledger stone, the Azul Monica limestone, which is more in these areas, surfaces of the patios, and then forms of epay on the decks, and the facade is actually a stucco. When we decided on this briarwood sort of muted warm gray color. And then the building has two sort of rather strong walls that capture the main dining room or the main living room. And it's a basalt. So it's a sort of a gray stone that is used there. And yeah, those are the main materials that are going to be used in this.
Thank you.
Laura, Joey, Mark, do you have any more questions?
Do not.
No.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the public in case there's anyone in the audience that has any questions, comments, or concerns. Oh, and Matthias, can you stop the screen share now?
Oh yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Here we go.
Okay, if there are no comments from the audience, I will bring it back to the ADR for recommendations to the town council. Who would like to go first? Joey, since you started us off tonight.
Oh, okay. Well, it's Matthias, right?
You got it. Yeah,
Matthias.
Matthias.
Not Matthias. Matthias.
Mhm.
I really think this is a beautifully designed project. I think it's interesting and architecturally very beautiful and different. So I think it's really well done how you've stepped into the hillside and kept it as unobtrusive as possible with
Thank
the
you.
green roofs and the natural materials. I think it's really interesting. It's a different building and is an exciting addition to our town. The couple of things I wonder about, I feel like there's this movement with these ADUs where it's basically just an addition of square footage to the house.
Mhm.
And we are very sensitive to making that a true ADU that really has its own access point and its own parking. It's a
Mhm.
little obvious on this one that it's going to be a pool house. So I think just as you're developing this project, I would suggest that it actually has its own dedicated, maybe a stairwell from the parking lot. And it has its real own access and it's clearly an ADU. That's
Mhm.
something I would care about. I also think it's obvious you have a lot more, you're having a lot of off haul off this site, but I could excuse that because you're sinking the house into the
Mhm.
into the hillside more. So I think
Yeah.
that's a worthy trade-off. It's gonna be a nightmare building this, no matter how you do it on that road. Like,
But-
it's not gonna be fun for anyone, but the net of it, I think is worthwhile. And those are kind of my only real comments. I think it's very well done and sits in the hillside very nicely and is a vast improvement over what's there.
Thank you.
So I'll leave it at that.
All right.
Thanks, Joey. Who would like to go next?
I'm fine to make some comments. So I concur with Joey. I think, at first glance, it's an impressive project. It took a long while to get through the drawings because there's a lot of information. So I do want to compliment you on the amount of information that you put forth and the variety of angles you were able to provide the design review committee on what this project would look like. So thank you for that. We don't always get on a project that's this complicated. You've thought through pretty much everything, and I appreciate you giving us those views. So that's
Thanks,
number
Mark.
one. I concur with Joey. I think it's really interesting. I love the idea of the folly on the dining room. I am concerned about it sort of massing in relationship to that other neighbor. So I think that is something you just want to continue to look at and make sure that it is somewhat obscured. I know you have some tree removal to work through there, but I think it's kind of a fun element. Unfortunately, it probably won't get used as much as, like, functionally, the dining room doesn't get used all that often. So it's a really terrific space that might, not see as much usage as it could. I'd say the parking area probably is an area that strikes me as somewhat problematic. I understand your desire to get some cars off the road, especially some of the service vehicles. It does seem like a source of a lot of retaining walls, a lot of cut. It's pushed right up against the property line. It's 4 spaces, which seemed significant. My experience is a lot of the service vehicles end up parking in the driveways of the projects that they're working on. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of landscaping here and maintenance. I would appreciate a lot of attention to that to minimize as much of that parking area as possible. And again, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but it further erodes the landscape and provides a lot of wall, a lot of cut and fill. To some degree, it's an area that isn't developed as much as it is right now. It's a shed, I think, right now. So that concerns me. I don't know if 4 spots is really necessary, given you have 2 in the garage and you have that, what is a long driveway at this point. So, however, I would say that I concur with Joey. I would see it's almost a necessity to provide some access from that parking lot to the ADU to make it real. The paths that you described and your honesty with what the probably will be used for, I appreciate, but isn't really in the spirit of an ADU, right? To have to walk through the building and go down the elevators, that's not going to happen for someone who's renting it. Because I think that's a town consideration whether or not these will ever be rented. But that is more obvious as a pool house. If you provided access from that parking lot, that parking area, I think you would benefit from that. But I think that the design of that area is in somewhat the only area that doesn't seem to nestle into the landscape as much as these other areas do. And obviously it's a parking area, it's not going to be the same, but that area kind of concerned me a little bit. And the amount of retaining walls that are needed to create that 4 extra parking spaces. When we do review homes on the hill, we talk a little bit about the lighthouse effect, right? The sort of beacon on the hill. I appreciated your comment about the neighbors and the dining room. There's an awful lot of glass on that primary level. It's pretty much all glass, and I am somewhat concerned of that effect of it being really a lighthouse. I recognize, and every time we have these conversations, it's between the desire to look at the views and the desire not to see a giant beam of light coming off at us. So I would encourage you to think about it, especially be very considerate of the interior lighting and its effect on the exterior views. Because it's apparent, right? It's a lot
Absolutely.
less.
Yeah. We
Um,
actually also have to consider west facade shading.
Yep.
And so there will be something like that. Even we discussed exterior shading. The client is not terribly fond of it, but I'm still trying to work on that. I've introduced some to the dining room. So there will be a form of shading and curtain and privacy situations. So we're aware of that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
always the trade-off, right? So
It's absolutely, as you talked about the elevation trade-off, this is another one of those trade-offs. We love the view. Why would I mean, privacy,
Yeah.
almost nobody could ever see that view. So it's,
yeah, exactly.
it's more about the lighthouse effect. And then I would say, you know, just my initial thoughts of the gazebo, because I think it is an important element that you're proposing. It doesn't have a lot of detail around it, and I appreciate
Mhm.
that. I love the idea, but I'm pretty hesitant to support it, given that we're in the world of living inside of a forest. That seems to be an opportunity that isn't necessary. I love the, if it was there, I think I'd enjoy it. However, you know, when we think about protecting structures from fire and from fire danger, that's maybe asking a bit too much. And the height, as Stephen clarified, 30 feet. I thought it was a typo at first until I saw the drawings, and I thought a gazebo that's 30 feet tall. I'm hesitant to be able to support that as an element in the overall project. Again, I think it's a neat
Mhm.
element, and I get it. You know, sort of it terraces all the way down. It culminates in that sort of exclamation point.
Mhm.
But I think that it's a bit much given how buried it is in the trees and how tall it is. It's
Yeah.
just awfully
It
tall.
actually sits in a clearing, which is why we decided on it. There's an existing clearing, so this is why we realized there is still that space for the gazebo. And my client loving tree houses that much, we said, okay, we'll try it. But we can definitely work on the height. You know, we can bring it down further. That's not a problem. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I
hear
mean,
you.
you know, we battle between homes in forests and protecting them and keeping people safe, and then we continue to build even further into the forest while
Yeah.
there's a clearing. So that's an area of concern. I think it's an interesting piece, but probably
Mhm.
necessarily isn't warranted in this project.
Mhm.
Given the scope, it may just be one move too many.
Mark, can I interrupt you on that
Yeah,
point?
oh, please, yeah.
Can you, I'll make my comments separately, but I also was going to raise a comment about that gazebo. And so can you put a finer point? Like I'm prepared to say that I'll support the project as submitted with a couple things that I want to talk about. One being the gazebo, the other being the lattice work around the pool area. And so I don't know what kind of specific suggestion I could make for the gazebo, other than I will support this project if that's removed. But is there some kind of, you might think differently about it. You might say, well, I could support it if it was lower 4 feet, or I could support it if it didn't have a roof, or I could support it if X, Y, or Z. Can you make a specific constructive suggestion? Can I put you on the spot for that? Or are you not ready to make any specific suggestion?
You know, Steve, and I appreciate that, because you're right. Just saying I'm not comfortable with it is not necessarily is a good recommendation. So
I'm about to say the same thing, but I got no help, you know, so.
Yeah, I don't think lowering it is really my biggest, the height obviously is a concern, but lowering it 4 feet, as Stephen points out, isn't necessarily what I think accomplishes too much, right? I think it's you know, we're charged with trying to minimize the impact of these types of developments on our sites. And I think you have done an excellent job of nestling this and looking at those sections really carefully, which again, I applaud. That gazebo seems a little bit like an afterthought in some ways, and that's not an insult, but it obviously didn't get the attention to detail that you have put into the rest of the project. And part of me thinks it's a little bit of a throwaway. I think given the volume of work there, so Stephen, I think I'm more along the lines of, I could support if I didn't see that gazebo with the associated bridge and structure that goes along with it as part of the project. So I think it's a fair point. My recommendation would be, let's remove that. Let's minimize the impact of this site. And I would say part of that feeling is, as Joey pointed out right at the beginning, the hillside lot ordinance would severely limit the amount of square footage that you would be building on a site this steep. Given your given the precedent and the existing conditions, you get to build back to what you've got. I get
Mhm.
that. We could have arguments all night about it. But that gazebo exacerbates that sort of impact on the site, and I think it's just unnecessary. So to Stephen, your answer, I would say ixnay, bye-bye. That would be my recommendation. So I appreciate you pushing me on that, Stephen. And I think, just to comment, I think the materials, I like the change up of materials. I think the dark muted color is the right way to go on the mass, on the majority of the building. So I appreciate that as well. I pay, I just hope it's sustainable as far as a building material goes. That concerns me a little bit, but
Yeah.
overall, it's
Yeah.
the right. I like the differentiation. I like the stone base. I think that nestles in all the hill. So
Yeah.
that'd be my last comment.
Could I respond to the parking
Absolutely,
comment?
yeah.
So you mentioned how a lot of cars park in the driveways. Well, that's completely against fire code. We have to put up signs, in fact, that you cannot park your car. In fact, all the cars that are parking currently on Morrison Street every day, that's illegal. That's against the fire code. So I believe what we're providing, as much as it is taking up a lot of site, is actually the solution to a lot of non-compliant code situations up in the hills where you have trucks there all over the place. And if there's a fire breaking out, it's not looking good. So I think we need to consider that. And so I know how many arborists are there. Every time I was there, arborists, gardeners, all the time. I mean, Ross is like garden, you guys live there, so what it's like. And so I feel like what we're providing is actually a sensible solution to it. And I also hear you about the access to the ADU. I would love to put some steps in, but we're in the setback on the side. The law is such that it's an assumption that's a pool house. I think actually very much likely it's going to be part of family that's going to live there, which is baked into the ADU California laws. There's nothing I feel we cannot be discriminated against on that. If that's part of the legal language, then it cannot come from, let's say, I understand a lot of the ADUs are often misused for their own party zones and whatever. So, but at the moment, I think, in all fairness, I think we need to assume too that this is what the client would like to have her family from abroad or whatever live in this ADU as well. So that's a possibility. So we're trying to provide as much as possible, but unfortunately, we're also limited by the setbacks. So if I wanted to do a staircase, let's say on the side of the building from parking, I now need a variance, and a variance for a staircase is going to be quite a strain on us. So that's something
maybe we can ask Patrick to opine on that. I would think that a path less than 4 feet wide is allowed in the setback. Is it not, Patrick?
These stairs.
Well,
Yeah,
there
I
already is a
have to-
path there, though.
Right. If there's an existing path, then it's just you're replacing it. And as long as the walls are not retaining walls that are 100 feet long, and as long as the height of anything around those stairs is less than 18 inches, I think it wouldn't be subject to design review. It would just be part of the project.
Yeah. I had these discussions early on with Matthew Weintraub, and we couldn't even put a deck on the side or anything. So we were severely limited by that setback. So
I think the intent of the code is to
Yeah,
prohibit gathering in the setbacks, but I think paths and stairs are allowed.
Okay.
But
That
Well,
might
I'll
end
go
up
last,
being a variance.
adding a different path isn't going to change the usage of the ADU. So it's sort of
Yeah.
silly to say that you think, well, he's not going to rent it out, but let's put a different path in. It's
Yeah.
not going to change the usage of the ADU, and the law is what it is. So,
Yeah.
I don't think putting an extra path or access way is going to change the way the ADU is used now or in the future. It's never going to make economic sense to rent it out.
Yeah.
For an owner of the house.
Anyway.
Okay, so Mark, is that the?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the end of my comments. Yes.
Okay, Stephen, you've done part of your comments. Do you want to just summarize that, or did you sort of say what you wanted to say anyway?
No,
with those
I can
two
summarize
things?
really quickly. I think that sometimes the council is wary of a large off-haul or on-haul, cut and fill that's not balanced, but I agree that it's the right thing for the site, and I think that if there's a ton of off-haul, that's great, that's what should happen in this site to make it not a scar. I think the intent of the code is not to have kind of an abnormal looking modification to the topography at the end of the day. I'm also uncomfortable with the gazebo, and so I support the project fully. I think it's beautifully designed. I think you've done a great job. I support it
Thank you.
fully with the omission of the gazebo, or you could come back with a different design for it. You could delay present it to council and come back to ADR with a revised design for the gazebo, or you could proceed to council with our comments and take your chances with the gazebo, or remove the gazebo, or come back with it as a separate part of the project for our consideration. But that's how
Sounds
I
good.
feel about the gazebo.
Yeah.
I also think that lattice work is just kind of a crummy material. I think that we're trying to safeguard that nice materials are used, and
Yeah.
Ross suggests nice materials. I think it's a crummy material. And so I
Okay.
really don't
Yeah.
support the use of that material. I also think that those undercarriages of decks and pools that are built on stilts are kind of yucky, kind of skeevy. So I would much prefer 2 retaining walls that are stepped with plant in between or something like that. I know it's more expensive. I understand you have to span with grade beams and piers to not affect the trees. So I respect all that, but maybe there's something that is a woven wire that would accept vines or something just more better.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing you on both of gazebo and on that. So I think we're very flexible in that. If that stuff can go, I'm not married to the lattice work. It was just the screen and thanks. I mean, you're making the design better. So I'm like, I agree with you. That's usually Home Depot kind of add-on at the end. So we need to get that out.
I think the design is great. You've done a great job, and I can wholeheartedly support it as
Thanks,
presented with those modifications.
Laura?
Yes, hi, I'm going to keep it brief. I appreciate the design. I like all the radius edges throughout the project. That's great to see. And, one thing I noticed when I was at the site, kind of up in the street looking down, even though the house steps forward more away from the hillside, because it's dropping down 6 feet lower than the current roof, it actually doesn't obstruct any of the neighbors' views or anyone. So I appreciated that was taken into consideration. And then, the materials, like with those aerial shots that you have with the rendering in place, at least in those renderings, it looks like it kind of disappears into the site a lot more than the current building. Which is great, with the exception, of course, as was already discussed, at night when the house is lit up. But again, I'm not sure if there's any neighbors that are actually getting views of that, or if it's just across the hill,
Yeah.
So
We will make sure to make the lighting obviously decent, that it's more like recessed in the ceilings. We're not, we'll work out a lighting concept that makes it, we don't want to build a lighthouse here. So that's for sure. And yet, obviously, you have the hill sprinkled with buildings all over, and they have big frontages and big glass sides. So we're not going to be the only one where there's going to be some light. But I hear you. It's definitely a concern.
yeah, and I'm also in a west-facing building, so very important to think about whatever shading system, because we're always just having to put our roller shades down, and it's like we have a beautiful view, but we have to protect ourselves from the sun and the heat. So that's something to think about. And then with the gazebo, it was, I've only been living in Ross for a year, but it was definitely unique. I haven't seen anything like that. Maybe it exists, but I haven't seen anything like that. Made me kind of think of like Bali or something. But so I thought it was interesting, but it stands out a lot. Maybe it stands out too much. But I could think if it was lower, if it wasn't 30 feet tall, if it was lower, I could see how it could be potentially acceptable, especially if it doesn't have like lighting in it. Yeah, so those are my comments.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura. I agree with most of what was said. I think it's a beautiful design. I think it's going to be a massive improvement to the site. Obviously, the house that's there now is horrible and run down. It's a lot of work, so congratulations to the owner for being willing to put in all that effort. I agree with Mark and others that I think it's best not to have that gazebo, at least in the form it's in now. I would come back again, and I think it might actually be better if you have the house built a certain amount and then
Absolutely.
propose it and come back, because I
Yeah.
think it'll be much easier to visualize then and see
Mhm.
from other areas if it really is an issue, or maybe we're all pleasantly surprised and having a 30-foot tall gazebo stuck out there in space. You don't see it from anywhere except for from the house, and maybe it looks great.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Good
I
point.
would do that. Like I mentioned, I know what ADUs are. I know that Ross is not going to have a bunch of multifamily units at the moment. So I'm not concerned whether or not it has a direct path it sort of has a direct path down the side. I don't think, I'm not concerned if it has a second staircase or a third staircase to get down there. Okay. So Patrick, did you get all that? Obviously, everybody recommends the project. The majority recommends it without the gazebo. And then you had the other couple comments on the materials, and
I would like to go
Mark
back.
had concern about the parking as well,
Yeah.
which I think is actually practical, because having parked on that street, which I guess was illegal, I think that street could use more parking. And in many places, I would agree with Mark, but on this particular street, which is horribly narrow, when I was doing the 5-point turn to turn around, I would have rather had a bigger driveway there to.
Yeah,
think
I support-
that, but I want to just clarify. I wasn't saying park on the street. I was saying you now have a very you have a more generous driveway. So the folks who are servicing that home could park in the driveway and in the parking area that you provided in front of the garage. So there's a lot of off-street parking for this particular project now that didn't exist prior. And then adding 4 additional spaces, while I appreciate it, doesn't relieve all of the neighbors' gardeners, because they're not going to park in your 4 parking spots beyond your property. So it's
Actually,
how many gardeners do you have on your site at one time is excessive. That's my
Yeah.
point.
I respectfully disagree with you. I think they should provide all the parking they can possibly get there, because it's such a terrible street to drive up and try to park. I just don't agree with you on that one. I think it's fine as designed.
But I guess how many off-street parking spots do you need? So the question, that's a realistic question. So you've got 2 in the garage, and you have a relatively long driveway and a not a full turnaround, as you pointed out, in front of the garage. How many more off-street parking spots does one need for a home that is a single-family home with an ADU? How many spots do we think is appropriate that will really be used?
So again, the driveway is
9
not,
cars
the
off-site.
driveway is not a parking spot. We have to put a sign in front. This is the fire code. We cannot park there. I have to be strict on that. I
You
mean,
can't
that's
park in your own driveway.
you cannot drive. Nope. Go to the sheet. We have to put a sign there. The fire department requires us to put a sign there that this is a non-parking zone. We might even have to paint the curb. Go to the, yep, it's in there. I'm like, I would rather not have that, but if you want to see it, it's Ross Valley Fire Department. I even have on, if you go to sheet, it would be
That's
sheet.
fine. That's fine. I've been, I've made my comment, and my colleagues in the group have a different opinion. That's fine.
Okay. So Patrick, you've got that?
Yep, that said, I think the direction from the board is pretty clear.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And thank you for your
Thank you
time,
very
Matthias.
much.
Thank you, Matthias.
you. Thank you, guys.
And we will wrap that up. And now move on to the second project, 210 Lagunitas Road. Patrick, would you like to start the presentation?
There we go. I couldn't find where to unmute myself after I started sharing screen. So here is our next item. It is the address at 210 Lagunitas Road. And it's another irregularly shaped parcel, about an acre in size, somewhat sloped, but much less so than the previous project. It does have Ross Creek running through it, so it's adjacent to the creek, and it also is slope hazard 4. So even though the average slope on the lot is less than 30%, which would trigger the hillside lot ordinance, it is also triggered for a slope hazard zone of 3 or 4, in which case this project is subject to the hillside lot ordinance. The project proposes an addition to the garage, as well as a new ADU. And being a second-story ADU, it is not exempt from review. It does need to go in front of the town council for an exception to allow an ADU on the second story. Here are the elevations of the proposed project. They're not labeled, so I'm guessing these are what are proposed, not existing. You can see the ADU located on the second floor, with access being on the west elevation of the building. In addition to the garage addition and the ADU, there's landscaping proposed, as well as a new entry gate. The stone wall would be raised to 6 feet. The driveway would be, I believe it's an impermeable driveway. It would be replaced with porous surface, so that would be increasing the amount of, or reducing the amount of impermeability on the site. And then a major point with this project is that it's, as currently proposed, it includes removal of 7 large redwood trees on the property. And I'll go back and discuss a little bit about how that lines up with the town's tree ordinance and design review. We did receive a comment on this project that right now the town is losing a lot of our heritage trees. And so the commenter was not supportive of this project taking out the redwood trees. And so I will just touch on the redwood trees. The town had our arborist go out and take a look at them earlier today. And they're in fair condition. So they would be subject to, it's a 3-to-1 replacement ratio. So 3-to-1 diameter breast height. It's 1 inch replacement for every 3 inches that would be removed. So according to our arborist, and there would be a much more detailed report generated before building permits are issued. But the minimum town requirement would be 44 inches of replacement trees. And so that equates to, if a 24-inch box tree is about 2 inches in diameter, you'd be looking at about 22 of those replacement trees going in. And that being said, that's according to our standards for tree replacement. The project is subject to design review, so there's a lot more flexibility as far as screening or being in line with the design guidelines, which do talk a lot about preserving the natural environment in Ross. And our arborist is able to make recommendations on replacement trees. So ideally trees are replaced with the same species. When a native tree is taken out, it can be replaced with the same species, but also can be replaced with other native species that are perhaps more appropriate to the site. And then again, the preference is that the trees are replaced on site, and there is ample space on this property to put replacement trees on the site. But barring that, we can also have an in lieu payment that would allow for planting of trees elsewhere in town. So we're kind of made whole as far as the loss of those trees. But as the board is probably aware, there is a defining character of large redwoods at this part of Lagunitas Road. So that is something that staff is looking for guidance from the ADR group regarding the proposed tree removal. And with that, staff is recommending that the ADR group provide their recommendations, as this project would be subject to design review in front of the council. So we will be taking the recommendation of the ADR group to council for ultimate decision on this project. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Would the owner and or his team like to make a presentation?
Well, I can. Michael Yandel, landscape architect. First, thank you guys for letting me sit in on that last application. I didn't really know what the protocol was, but it was really fascinating to watch that presentation. And I think they did a fantastic job of documenting that application. Charlie Thibault is not apparently online.
No, he is. He's right here. I can see him. He was raising his hand to
He's right
speak.
next to you.
Hey,
Would it be better if Charles, would you or Michael like to present this project?
Charles.
I just gotta say, wow. It's interesting, the juxtaposition of these two projects. Yeah, so simply put, this owner is genuinely going to use his ADU, probably for an ADU. And he's always kind of envisioned that would be the right location. He doesn't see that the current garage is necessarily in the best structural shape. He wants it to be reinforced and kind of rebuilt in certain ways. And so the location in general was kind of a no-brainer. Obviously, as opposed to choosing another place on his property, which we could have done and kind of foregone the ADU review portion of this project, we still felt that it was the right location with respect to access from the street, access to parking, and minimizing any more further effects on the trees and the landscape. Because of the height is above the 16-foot, we were required to have it reviewed. So it's kind of a modest project. I was trying not to create a two-story faces that kind of would not be in character with a structure of this type and use, as the main residence really should be the star of this property. It's a beautiful old building and it's got kind of an appropriate estate-like feeling to it. This project is definitely secondary. I should know, Michael will address it later, that the owner is incredibly in love with his trees. Every time we're on site, he mentions it. But in addition to the ADU on the second story, we want to provide a realistic support for the garage itself and for the pool area. The owner, this particular owner, and the property and the house would support a large family. This owner has 6 kids. So the idea of a pool party is pretty common. And obviously, I could say that of the top 5 complaints I have with clients, one of them is when my kids have a pool party, they run into the main house and get water everywhere. So we were really trying to address that, at the same time providing a place, if the property owner was into spending time in the garage with his cars, for example, that he could use this powder room as a secondary support for, washing his hands, or using it for the bathroom if he's working out there. We are proposing, we try to put it as far away from the creek that we could. And on my first planning pass on this project, did not pick up on the fact that it was in a hillside lot, because I think for obvious reasons, when you go out there, it feels like a very flat and simple lot. And I think this is an example where the planning codes are a little bit restrictive and not taking into account the unique nature of this property. But previously, the location of our powder room, we actually proposed an exterior shower, because this element had to abide by the more restrictive 45-foot setbacks. It placed that outdoor shower at risk. So we removed it from the project, which I think is a little bit of a unfortunate thing. I mean, you know, we're not gonna, the owner's fine with it. He's not causing any issues about it. In addition, we're proposing relocation of an existing pool equipment. What's now a shed that probably was a kid shed, creative use of a kid shed as a pool equipment room. We're proposing to relocate that, clean it up, and locate it even farther away from the creek on the backside of the property. So it's actually a pretty straightforward project for the architectural aspect of it. And now I'd like to hand it over to Michael to address his aspects.
Good. You know, this is somewhat of an unusual site in that all these improvements that are there occur within a redwood grove. It's not generally that we would put these into that location. We kind of inherited that, at least from my end, and certainly from Charlie's, because that's where the garage was. So we're working within that grove. The three things that are related to site improvements are the widened entry gate, and we're doing that so we get a little closer to the Ross Fire Department codes at 16 feet. It at least allows a fire safety vehicle to get its nose into the project. They'd fight a fire from the street anyway. There's no way to pull in and turn around on that property. We're also moving the gates back from the street 5 feet, which is about as far as we can go without getting into more redwood removal. And I should actually start with the arborist report was supplied to the design team. We didn't go in and ask for removal of trees. The owner, who we mentioned, loves his trees, had the arborist come out, survey all of his trees, look at which ones were good, which ones are leaning, which ones are hazardous, which ones might be in decline, which ones are leaning or struggling for light and air. And that's where they came up with these 7 trees. A couple of them, yes, are related to widening the gate, but the other ones are in his report as hazard or decline. And we can certainly talk about mitigation subsequently, but that's kind of the storyline behind the arborist report. When I'm looking at this, I was looking at that wall that's out in front, and the owner said he'd like to have his wall up to the height of the adjacent property. My read on it was, you know, I don't mind raising that. It's kind of a, I call it higgledy-piggledy street front out there. You got some stuff along the street, and then you've got this rubble wall, and then David has his wood fence that's in there, and it's kind of a hodgepodge. My idea is to clean it up, but not refine it, because I like the rustic character of that particular section of the street. The adjacent property has treated their wall much more estate-like. It's level, it's straight, it's plumb. I would like to let the wall that is currently there, which meanders through the trees on the street front, be raised to the 6 feet, get rid of his wood fence that is behind it, pull a laurel hedge up to the back of the wall, and then what you're presenting to the street is green foliage on the backside, a rather rustic, I would stay in the rubble construction on this. I would not level off the top. I'd let it move around a little bit. And I think it speaks to the street a lot better. Our third thing is looking at the parking, and there's all that asphalt, and it's kind of moving and it's heaving, and there's some root damage and whatnot. I was talking to the arborist about it and said, you know, if we have a really good operator can remove asphalt from that location, we can do a loose pack of class 2 permeable base that doesn't get whacked in, and set these square cobbles in there. We can get more air and water into the root zone and give him a much more interesting driving surface in there. And keeping it with that dark basalt cobble, it should sit down and it doesn't read necessarily driveway. It just is a surface in there. So the goal on this is for it to keep a rustic character, because the owner, in fact, likes it to feel like a summer camp. That's kind of his description of that property. So we're not trying to refine it. And for all those reasons, that's the look that we came up with along the street. All the existing trees would stay, plantings would stay, the ferns, the whole wall would be built from the inside of the property out. So it wouldn't even be working from the outside. And so that's site improvements. And I realize it's an odd configuration because these improvements are actually outside the property line in their existing condition. Comments from staff or from the board?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to ask some questions just about the arborist report. You said that this wasn't because of what you asked him. He just happened to give the owner advice and he happened to recommend these 7 trees, but apparently only the trees in the driveway. But he specifically mentions in many parts that the removal of this tree is because the owner wishes to have it removed in order to widen the driveway for emergency vehicle access. And he mentions that several times, that the trees are in fair, according to him, fair health. But, quote, I have been informed the gate and driveway need to be widened to accommodate emergency and other larger vehicles. And that's a total of 4 trunks. So it seems that this arborist is actually the worst arborist report I've ever seen.
Tree 4, 5. Trees 4, 5, and 6, correct?
Well, first of all, just so everyone's aware, by trees, they're counting often 4 trunks as 1 tree, which might be the actual definition. But just so you're aware that not every trunk that's going to be removed was marked on the site. They marked 1 of the 4 trunks of the tree. So I think that for neighbors or townspeople or even town council members or ADR members might not realize that and think there were only 7 trunks being taken, but it's actually about 13. And I'm not saying this is a bad project or a good project. I'm just saying it would be good if neighbors and the town council and ADR understood what was being taken. And in tree number 2, which is 36 inches in diameter, quote, the property owner wishes this tree removed in order to widen the driveway for emergency vehicle access and for more parking capacity. It's in, quote, fair health and structure. And then he, for some reason, opines on the value of the properties. I guess he's a property appraiser as well. He's talking about how it won't affect negatively next door neighbors in their property values, which seems like a weird thing for an arborist to opine on. For redwood number 4, which has 2 trunks of 31 inches and 18 inches, quote, construction required to widen the gate and driveway would compromise the tree's root system to an unacceptable degree. Therefore, it should be removed. For redwood on number 5, which has 3 trunks, 31 inches, 22 inches, and 34 inches, quote, the owner wishes to exercise reasonable use and enjoyment of the property. I guess the arborist is opining on that, including making needing improvements such as driveway and gate widening. While many of these trees started as sprouts, blah, 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 in order for the owner to avoid unreasonable economic costs, these should be taken out. So of the 13 stumps, over half of them are just to widen the driveway, and that's fine. People take out trees for projects, but it's sort of ridiculous to pretend that this arborist was saying they're all in bad health, because even according to the arborist, they're not. They're being taken out for the construction or because the construction will damage them to a point that they'll then become dangerous. One of the trees that's absolutely healthy now, he says once he removes another tree, then there'll be more wind on this other tree, and therefore it should be taken out, but as a result of the construction. So it's fine to take out trees, but I mean, we just shouldn't pretend that there are trees that need to be taken out for a reason other than the construction project. Would you say that was a fair assessment of the quotations, Michael?
I think so. I haven't worked with this arborist before. The three trees that are in particular related to the widening of the gate at the front, we are clear on that they are being removed for the widening of the gate.
Okay, yeah, he lists, I think, 7 of the trunks I just counted, of
And
the
I
13
believe as
trunks.
an arborist, and you might have, you may know more. When they sprouted up from a older tree that has either broken off or been taken down or was damaged by fire or something like that, I believe the arborist, I guess not their code, but their way of looking at things is they count it as one tree, even if it has 4 stems coming up out of the tree.
Oh, yeah, no, and that's correct. It's just sort of, when he wants it to seem like a smaller number, he talks about the trees. And then later on, when he wants to talk about the remaining
Or value.
trees, he doesn't mention trees. He talks about 60 remaining trunks. So he's using either trunks or trees, depending on where he wants it to seem lower or higher.
I
And
think we
then
should
I
get to
guess
the
he's also-
architecture.
Yeah. Just so you're aware of the arborist report. Okay.
I think that's really, those are really well researched and thought out comments, but I think first we need to get to the architecture and the trees will kind of follow at the end.
And Chair Christian, if I can just chime in, I will mention that staff was not satisfied with this arborist report. That's why we sent our own town arborist out today to do our own assessment. And for our calculation purposes, we just do the, for multi-trunk trees, we only calculate the diameter of the largest of those trunks.
Okay. Charles, would you be able to screen share and go over the architecture with the ADR? Thanks. And you're on mute also. Charles, you're on mute.
Sure, I have 2 computers connected, so whichever one doesn't have the screen, my face, can you, oh, I can do it.
Great, we can see it now, thanks.
Okay, great. So would you like another recap, or do you have particular questions?
I think showing us the different profiles of the and elevations of the new ADU over the garage would be great.
Okay, so just to get your bearings, this is the location. This site plan shows the proposed development. And this is the existing creek and the creek setback. This shows the 45-foot setback, sideline setback, as well as the 25-foot setback. So this is on the lower level, the garage footprint basically remains the same. In order to structurally reinforce the existing garage and accommodate the second-story ADU, in discussions with the structural engineer, we've changed it from 2 double doors to a double door and a single door to get some lateral support on this face. I think it'll make it a little bit more, I think it's fine as far as pleasing. The lighting at this level is pretty simple, with just some wall sconces for just path lighting. We're not trying to highlight this as the primary residence. This is the existing garage. A little bit further detail. This shows the existing pool equipment room that we're proposing on removing and relocating. So as you can see right now, obviously the vehicular access is through this side of the elevation. And there's a man door that leads you to a pathway that leads you to the kitchen entrance of the main residence. Kind of the more informal way of entering. Moving to the elevations. These are the floor plans proposed. Lower level we just reviewed with the garage, bathroom, and the pool equipment room. We have at the upper level, basically the ADU, which is pretty straightforward. We have the entry stairs from the exterior, which is a little bit protected, so it's not, so it's a little bit cleaner look and allows for a little bit more of the stairway to have a little bit more landscaping in front of. But basically you'd come underneath the deck, enter the stairs and go up to the ADU unit. The ADU unit walls are set back from the existing lower level, just so that there's a little bit more roof form reading and it doesn't seem so massive. It's just a way of breaking down the mass. I did have to change the roof pitches. The existing roof pitch is steeper in this direction. It's less steep on the sides. It's kind of an interesting roof. But the roof pitch of the ADU that I'm proposing is 3 and 12. And the idea is just to minimize the overall height of the project. As required for this ADU, since this is the side setback, there are no openings allowed nor shown on this side of the building, so that there's no privacy issues or light issues with the adjacent property. Going to the elevations, this is, well, I trust you've all had a chance to visit the property. These are existing photographs of the conditions. And these are the elevations. So this is the front elevation that you would see mostly from the street. It's basically a simple symmetrical plan. It's meant to be a calm elevation. Simple. This is the stairway that we're proposing to be solid in the front. So again, it's protected. There's an upper deck that's, you know, a minor, small exterior space for the occupant of the ADU, which I think is nice so that they have a little privacy. Coming around to the side, to the west elevation, this is facing the main residence. So this is that stairway that is going to be used for pedestrians to move in between the ADU/garage and the main residence. And I'm really trying to promote a trellis element and try and activate this area as a support space for pool activities, just so that I really enjoy designs that don't require kids to necessarily ask, where do I get a new towel? Where do I go to the bathroom? That the architecture is kind of informing the use of it and calling attention to it. Because in this direction is where the pool is located. This elevation is the one that faces the side property or the adjacent property. So as you can see, you know, from this elevation, it's very plain, almost relentlessly plain. But keep in mind that there's the existing redwood fence that separates the two properties, and we're just trying to keep this to maintain the privacy. This is the side that, if you've been to the location, basically faces north and faces the creek. It's pretty heavily wooded area. There's no intention to have people hanging out back in this area. This shaded structure represents the existing pool equipment room that we're trying to gauge into the existing building. And then of course, these are the two windows that you could look out from the ADU unit itself. So that is the basic idea behind this ADU. Here's the two sections. This shows the existing condition. It's actually fairly tall right now and does have a fairly adequate storage space. So we're just going up another, I believe it's 18 inches from what's there. Pretty straightforward sections. This is the existing garage. And of course, some of this is pending the structural, but I'm trying to be responsible in leaving the structural engineer adequate space for him to perform his work. These are the materials, and you know, in the spirit of an ADU being a part of the overall property, the main house, which is really a beautiful house to look at, really is going to lead us as far as our materials. We're not trying to try and distance ourselves from the main property. we're trying to match the materials. I think in general, the materials, besides the white trim, tend to recede into the shadows of the redwood grove. And I think as people drive and walk by it, I think that there's enough shadow and darkness of color that it's not going to be a visual detraction from that public corridor. And then this is the landscape page. Any questions?
Do any ADR members want to see a different elevation or anything else?
I have one question to maybe, I'm not sure if it's Charlie or Michael, Mandor, is there a person gate in addition to the vehicular gate proposed? I don't think there is one on site today, but is there one there?
Yes, there is. It's tucked around the side.
Oh, here it is right here.
Right there.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so that's a new proposal compared to what we have today, right?
Yes, and the idea on that was to turn it away from the street so we're not presenting another gate out towards the street. It's
Thank
kind of it's a found gate for the owner.
Appreciate that.
Does anyone else have any questions before I open it up to the public? Okay. Are there any audience members that would like to ask any questions of the design team or make any comments? Okay, then I'll bring it back to the ADR. Is there someone who'd like to go first? Oh, and actually, sorry, Charles, can you stop the screen share?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Is there someone on ADR who would like to go first?
I can go first.
Thanks, Laura.
Sure. So I think that the ADU above the garage is a very modest proposal with minimal impact on the site. Only raising by 18 inches is appreciated. And I think from my experience, trying to pull my larger car into your driveway and then turn around, I can understand the desire to widen the vehicular gate and the driveway space there. You know, I think what makes this site so special is the redwoods. Like even when I was there, I just took a picture kind of looking up. It's really amazing. So I can understand why neighbors would be apprehensive for removing some of those redwood trees. But you know, I can see how it's kind of necessary for proper use of the site. So I think those are really the comments that I had. Thank you.
Who would like to go next? Joey?
Okay, so you have an existing nonconformity where the single car garage to the right is already in the setbacks. And we are always charged with not exacerbating a nonconformity. And we're now putting a second story on that. So I'm not sure how you would address that comment that we actually cannot exacerbate nonconformity. So even if that were to be allowed, I might suggest that the form now of the roof is this very deep pitch. It's very gracious, old school. And instead we're kind of jacking it up and making it very much a two-story looking element. Would you consider, I would even consider ignoring the 30-foot height limit to make the ridge height higher so that you could have that very beautiful sloping roof and then have the ADU sit in that. I just feel like it's such a really beautiful old building now. And the way we're going to replace this, you're rebuilding the whole structure. So you can basically do whatever you want. And you are really very much exacerbating a nonconformity. The other comment I would make is the way that the stairs are oriented with a solid wall as opposed to railings, is that you kind of put the mass toward the street, and when you drive into the driveway, that's a solid wall of solid railings going up to the ADU, as opposed to if you flipped it or if you made that more of a transparent element, it wouldn't read as such a solid mass to the left of the garage as you're driving in. I think it just could be a lighter element. Those stairs and that deck, they could just read as transparent as opposed to solid. Basically, my feeling when I looked at it is that the existing structure is very quiet and dark, and it just kind of goes away. And that the new structure that is proposed has a lot of fenestration and fascia, things that are painted to match the main house, and it will all of a sudden read as another building. Whereas right now you kind of look through the redwoods and it's just quiet and dark. So those are the things that I care about a lot, is that it's just a little bit of a jolt to the system as you're going up Lagunitas and you're at the end there and it just looks like a bunch of redwoods. All of a sudden you're removing 7, or based on our conversation earlier, could be up to 14 redwoods, and then you're building a second story in the setbacks that has a lot of white trim and a lot of detail, where I feel like it could just be quieted down. So those are the things I'm thinking about.
Joey, would you like to make a comment? And Laura too, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you about the proposed gate and stone wall.
I can support that. I can support that because I see the reasoning behind it, even though it's not, it's a really public place and there's a jillion bikers going by all the time. I can see a desire for a little more privacy there if you own that piece of land, and it actually will meld very well with what's next door. So I don't have a problem with that. I think that's an extraordinary situation.
Thank you. Laura, sorry, I should have asked you when you were talking originally.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can understand the need for privacy with how many people travel on that road. So I would support that as well.
Okay. Stephen or Mark, would one of you two like to go next?
I can go, Mark. I support the automobile gate and the stone wall. I think those are fabulous, and those look great to me. I can't support the ADU on top of the garage in the non-conforming position that close to the property line. I think full stop. But if it were to be represented, I'm also not quite comfortable with the architecture yet. And so even if it were in a conforming position, and if it's redesigned, maybe we would see that as a proposal. And if it were not, exacerbating a non-conforming element, I'd like to see it either match the house better or match the original architecture of the garage better. And I think Joey is absolutely right that it's a really charming structure with a classical roof line, and it's got the kind of gable end with a little hat on the side, whatever you call that roof form, where it kind of hips away, which is really beautiful. And what we've got here in presentation is a roof line that just reads to me like, that's conforming to the height requirements, as kind of Joey said. And so I think that the roof line on the main house is quite shallow, actually. And I could see that it could match that with a low sloped hip not a gable end like is currently designed, but a hip with large overhangs with the beam ends that exactly match the main house. I think the windows should match the main house with divided lights above and clear pane below, and double gangs of double hungs on the main house, like kind of much more faithfully. I don't think that the solid staircase railing, for example, is a nice departure from the main house architecture. But I think, so I have things to point out that I think that that for me, the architecture of the thing could be improved to, and if it better matched the main house, I could find success in it. But I think backing up a step, I don't know if I can find any success in proposing a second story ADU in this non-conforming position.
Okay.
I
Thank you,
want to say
Stephen.
one other thing too.
sorry, please.
I'm sorry, Mark. I think that it is really wonderful how many trees are in this area. It's also quite a hardship on the site. You have to drive around these old trees. It's kind of funky. And so I could see that some solution that meets code and does not require special exception could be proposed. And it also would require removing several redwood trees. I think that's okay. I think that's I could find to support that, as long as there were some measures taken to replace trees with very mature specimens, and I would say with no in lieu fee. I think that it's neat that there are a lot of trees in this area, but maybe they could, if they're removed from this particular spot where it's a hardship for the driveway, maybe they could be placed in a spot on the lot where it was acceptable to the function of the grounds.
Thank you, Stephen. Sorry, before Mark goes, I have just a quick question for Charles.
Yeah.
Sorry, on the setbacks, excuse me as I enlarge it here, there's a 25-foot side setback and a 45-foot side setback.
Yeah, sorry for the
Could you
confusion.
explain the difference in those two that are in the midst of the garage?
Sorry for the confusion. I should have removed the 25-foot setback. The original classification that I saw based on the zoning maps was that zoning, and then Matt relayed to me that based on the Marin maps and the hillside lot classification of being a steep site, it had the more restrictive setbacks.
Okay. Okay, thank you for explaining that. Sorry. Mark, did you want to go or did you want me to go first?
You're already going. Feel free to continue.
Okay. So first of all, in regards to the wall and the entrance gate, I agree with everybody else that I like them. I think it would look nice. Both the main gate and the side gate. I do agree with Joey that we're not supposed to exacerbate any nonconformity. I think it's a shame on this lot that the side setback isn't the 25 feet, because obviously in this area of the lot, it's flat. It's not a hilly part right there. It seems like 25 would be much more appropriate, like it is in our house and many others in the flat area of Ross. To me, the massing seems fine when seen from the street, but we're just not supposed to approve something that's or recommend something that exacerbates the nonconformity. And it seems that based on that, even if we used, unless we were using the 25-foot setback and doing a ground floor ADU just behind the garage, which seems like it would work, I'm not sure if that's something that would be, if the town would be able to give a variance to that, having it, and I have no idea if the owner or you, Charles, would have any interest in that. I'm just sort of thinking out loud, wondering if you could do one that was 25 feet from the property line and the town would be fine with it. I don't know. Because the massing did not see, as Laura pointed out, adding 18 inches to the structure is not a big deal at all. It seems like a nice solution if it looked, if it sort of matched the house in the roof style. And I do agree with a lot of Joey's architectural comments. So I actually would be fine with the idea of a second story ADU there or a ground floor ADU there. If we could figure out some way to do it where it's not exacerbating a nonconformity, which we're not supposed to recommend. I'm sorry, I can't be more definitive than that.
It's okay.
Mark?
Yeah, this is interesting. So just the front gate, the wall, I like Michael's description of the wall and the gate, certainly setting it back. The removal of those redwoods, while not ideal, makes a ton of sense because even my tiny little car had trouble getting in there. So totally supportive of that. When it comes to the architectural component, and I respect all my colleagues' point of not exacerbating a nonconformity, because that is kind of a guideline we try to uphold. In this particular case, I'm torn a little bit. The neighboring lot is, we know the history of that neighboring lot, right? It's more or less the home is up the hill. This lot that we're building on here doesn't present itself as a hillside lot in any way, shape, or form. The fact that it is, I think, is a characterization of our codes in an odd applicable way than it is anything else. So I can kind of support a unit on top of this garage, especially in its impact of the overall development of the site, right? When I step back and think, if that owner wants to put an ADU on this site and has the right to do so on the ground floor, that would be a greater impact on this site than actually what is being proposed here. So I would actually understand the nonconformity issue and the implications there and support. I could support a second story on this particular building. However, I do actually agree with Joey's comments around the architecture and to somewhat what Stephen said. It's sort of in between a little bit of what we have today and what the home is. I could actually see a second story which lives within that steeper pitched roof. I know that is not incongruous with the current home, but I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic, right? And I do believe that in the treatment of that, I would probably remove the idea of sort of accentuating white trim. I would make it recess in the way that the current structure does, right? Like in the detailing of it, it does have a sort of a campy feeling to it. Maybe it's because it's in the redwoods and because it's all dark. And I think I would rather see a pitch that's slightly taller than what you're proposing, even above the 18 inches. Maybe it's 2 feet or 3 feet higher, so that you could get the appropriate dormers and head height in there to make it a usable ADU, right? Incorporating that stair, I kind of understand where you're coming from. I don't know if I have a better solution, because I think an exposed stair in that location starts to make me think apartment building a little bit. So I kind of almost like having it as a component of the mass itself. I think taking the pool house or the pool equipment and shoving it in and incorporating that makes sense. Less things on the site. I'm assuming we're not addressing the water tank, right? That's actually almost on the property line. I throw it out there as an idea, as a mitigating factor, because that's as close. Is there a spot that could be relocated that would be less impactful on the neighbor, even though it's a water tank and it really doesn't have that much mass? I'm sort of thinking the give and take here. So I guess to summarize, I would say I could support a second story ADU in this particular location, even though, as my colleagues have stated, it does exacerbate a nonconformity. But I would take a look at the architecture to match more in kind with the current structure that's in that location, that current garage, versus the home, versus the house. I think separating them as much as possible architecturally gives you exactly what you're trying to achieve. Like, the primary unit is the home. Don't accentuate any of the trim in that regard. Make it disappear into the redwood field, as it kind of does today. So I think those are my comments. I think the trunks versus trees comment, right? I think it is a little bit shocking to know that it's more like 13 or in that region for actual visual trees versus however the root structures combine. So wherever you move forward in that, just be very blunt, tag all the trunks that they're going to be removed or not removed so that the town council has a very clear understanding. I stood around for quite a while trying to figure out what was being removed and what wasn't. So I think that's, I would strongly recommend that as you guys move forward to clearly identify which trees with tags and tape or whatnot. So I think that summarizes my thoughts.
Thank you, Mark. Patrick, after listening to Mark so eloquently speak, I agree with everything he says because I didn't think the massing was a problem. So I would be fine with the second unit up top there and recommending it, and the town council can be the decider. However, I do think that they should listen to Joey and Mark's architectural comments regarding that second story ADU.
Can I speak up? So
Sure, go ahead.
just as a, just as a little bit of history, I work with Matt in, day one was meeting with him to review the basic idea. And according to his explanation of the ADU code, the ADU has a 4-foot setback. I can put the setback could be anywhere within 4 feet of.
For a single story.
Yeah. So his theory was at the second story, which is triggering the height, we're still 10 feet away. He thought that it would be received from a standpoint of less impact on the site to have it on an existing non-conforming second story than to put it elsewhere on the site as a single story. The owner mentioned that, maybe we could build it someplace else if they don't like it or over the garage. I thought it was the appropriate location. I agree with the comments of the slope. It pained me to make it that short because of architectural style, but I was trying to respect the spirit of massing that close to a property line. I agree with the darkness of the space as it is now and the detailing. But again, as part of the ADU code, it's pretty clear that the concept of wanting the ADU to look like the main house. I get that, so that we don't have a whole bunch of prefab modern ADUs placed right next to a old craftsman style house. I think that intent is right. I'm more than supportive of having a darker trim, and that's fine with me. But with respect to the stairway, some of the thoughts that crossed my mind on that is, I think it's responsible to, especially the next exterior stair, to have adequate lighting. And if you face the stair to the street, that would just mean that there's going to be more light that goes and is exposed to all the people walking up and down. And I think there are people coming back from a hike that occupy that. I don't want them to see the lights of the property. I don't think that's part of the experience. It's kind of a transitional zone in my mind. You don't feel like you're necessarily in a neighborhood. You're kind of coming out of the woods. The other idea with having it more solid than more matching the main house with the more decorative is the idea that right beyond it, there's a lot more activity. Typically pools and the activity around a pool being a noise generator, it's not necessarily an advantageous thing to have people walking by experience that. So I thought it was in some way protecting the back of the property and the entryway. So that was some of the ideas. I'm flexible with respect to redetailing out the stairway and obviously the windows and the roof form. I'd love to have more space. At a certain point, I wanted to avoid any kind of two-story face, two-story faces. So I really needed to wrap that roof around to try and break it down. And I think that setting it in and setting it back lessens the massing of the structure. And at a certain point, the garage is the size it is. It's not a large ADU by most standards. So I was kind of reticent to reduce it even more. I like the idea of a steep pitch roof with dormers, but I think that when you look at the usable area from something like that, based on the current width of that existing, I'm not sure you're going to get a lot of usable space. And I was trying to respect the creek setback. I mean, honestly, Matt told me the biggest thing that I wanted to make sure to maintain on this development was respecting the creek yard setback. He didn't have any problem with the location of the ADU on the second story at all. But
I think you're on mute, Mark. There you go.
Thank you, Charles. So, Patrick, we haven't made it that easy for you. Do you have enough, or do you need people to, you need Laura or Joey or anyone to restate their position, or?
I think it's pretty clear that from my notes, the group is largely supportive of the project. I didn't hear much opposition to the redwoods, but there were a few comments on how the removal could be mitigated. And then regarding the ADU, it sounds like it's not unanimous, but the ADR group is generally supportive of the ADU with some changes to the architecture of it. And what I think we would probably do in this case is when we get the resubmittal back from the applicant in preparation for moving forward to council, we might pass it around to members of the ADU for comment to see if any changes that would be reflective of the comments that were heard tonight.
I think that would be great, Patrick. Thank you.
I mean, do you think it would be you think it would be more favorable to have a separate ADU located someplace else on the property? And we could just go
No,
straight.
not for me anyway. What about
No,
you guys?
I think it's more favorable where it is. I'm sorry, where it's proposed by you.
And
Yeah. I agree. That's the least intrusive way of adding it to the site.
I think that might be true, but right now it's not architecturally appropriate.
Yes, I agree with you. And I also think you have the problem with the setback. It's, a third of that garage is already in the least restrictive setback. Sorry, I just choked on my water. And then you're putting a second story above that non-conforming portion. What about, you're already rebuilding the garage? What about taking the whole thing out of the setbacks and then building it as you are proposing, but also with an eye to trying to maintain the roof form as is with that very deep pitch and keeping it kind of this campy outbuilding that doesn't match the main building, or does actually match it very well, but it's either one, not in between.
Well, I think to have it function as a garage, it relates to streets, and the entry from the street relates to the whole public way there. I mean, I guess you could argue we should relocate the entire site entry away from the tree grove, create a new entryway to a garage that's more exposed. It seems like we're trying to work with some givens of the entryway is probably in the right location. I don't like seeing redwood trees go away myself. But given that the garage has been established, the creek is where it is. I can't push we couldn't even push the garage back without, violating the creek yard setback, which I think is a dangerous thing. I guess we could continue the driveway further back and then jog left, but the pool is basically there.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
mean,
bit-
if you're looking at A 1.0, I mean, even if you're completely rebuilding the garage, like where would you, as you say, Charles, like, I don't know where you would put it. Because yeah, you'd be either getting closer and closer to the creek or having it next to the house, like it seems like it is in the best place.
It does. It seems like it's the most benign place for this to occur. I think it's just more of an architectural exercise. I know you have the whole issue of the non-conforming side, but I think I'd lean towards it's a very unusual non-conforming kind of lot in that it has a creek that's coming through that has pressures on it, and it has redwoods on it that are a pressure, and it just seems setting that right in that location just seems perfect. Rather than
I
eat up
think-
the rest of the yard somewhere,
Yeah.
we'd have to have more
I
driveway,
agree.
turnaround, fire truck. God.
I think if it looked more like the current structure and it was less of an assault and a brand new thing that people who've gotten used to for decades, going past this really cool old garage with this steeply pitched roof that just kind of recedes into the distance there. That would mean more to me than all the particulars of the setbacks and exacerbating a nonconformity.
I agree.
If the
I go the other
architecture
way, though.
itself if the architecture just went away.
Right, so I would not try to blend it in with the main house. I would make it's in concept what is going on right now. And that's the whole thing about
Exactly.
the rough hewn wall out front, the camp feel, the redwoods, that whole thing. It really wants to sit.
Right, it just goes away,
Goes
just make it
together.
go away.
Absolutely, no white trim. I don't think you do the gridded windows, but that's for Charlie.
Okay, so we've got direction now. Sorry for all the advice, Charlie. That might have been more than you were hoping for, but I think it will end up making it great. And it'll end up being basically where they want it to be and just changing the architecture a bit. Okay, thank you to the team for all that time. We will now move on to the next project, which will be a relatively rapid 10 Ames Avenue, the Costello residence. And we need to get Patrick back doing the starting presentation.
And here it is. So yes, the next project before you is the Costello residence design review. The parcel is around 20,000 square feet. And it's a flat parcel, kind of triangular in shape at the cul-de-sac at the end of Ames Avenue. Existing on the site is a single family residential building, as well as 2 accessory structures that are located in the rear yard. The project proposes to install a new pool with the related decking and landscaping, and this would be in the rear yard setback. And as an offset for the impervious surface added by the pool, the currently impervious driveway would have some porous materials used to replace it to create that balance of no net increase in impervious. The equipment enclosure would be within the setbacks, or it'd be outside of the setbacks, so that would be conforming. And all of the decking and patios would be below the 18 foot or 18 inch maximum that we typically have that would trigger design review. But the project as a whole does trigger that design review. So there are no elements that are exempt from your consideration here. We've received no comments on this project since noticing it. And with that brief presentation, staff is asking for the ADR group to discuss the merits of the project and provide a recommendation as this project will be moving forward to council for design review. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Dan Costello or Brad, do you want to make any comments?
I'm here. I think it's a pretty simple proposal. We did everything we could to keep everything out of the setback except for the pool. You can see on where the setbacks are that there is no other place to put a pool here. And if you've been to the site, the pool is staked and it is located in an existing patio area and in an existing barbecue area as well. So we're not really pushing any use towards the property lines. That's great that we didn't get any comments from neighbors. We did neighborhood outreach and neighbors did seem supportive. You know, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Does anyone on the ADR have any questions about this? I assume we all went there and saw the staked out pool. Okay, great. So is there anyone in the public that would like to make any comments or have any questions about the project? I don't see anybody raising a virtual hand. This time I'll go first. It's a pool in the setback. However, the neighbors that are closest, the only one that would really be affected by it are the people up the hill. And I sort of walked to that edge of the property line and saw a bunch of unused space, what I would call almost privacy space, and then a old-fashioned retaining wall, and then a higher level. It didn't seem like they'd really be disturbed by it. And I'm not sure if there was something written from them or not, but I assume if they had a problem with it, we would have received something or be hearing about it. So it seems fine to me.
I can go ahead. I can support it as submitted.
Thanks, Stephen. Joey, Mark, Laura?
I can support it as submitted, and I have no problem with the little portion that is in the setback because it doesn't really matter. As you said, the people are way above them. It's fine. I say yes.
I also would support the project with the irregular shaped lot. It would be hard to fit a pool that didn't infringe on the setbacks a little bit. So I think it's located in a place that makes sense.
Thanks, Laura. Mark?
No comments here. Yep.
Okay. Brad, are you living in a warehouse now?
This is my office. It's a 1906 old auto garage.
Okay, cool.
I don't live here.
Okay. Great. Okay, well, that was a very short project. Patrick, you have unanimous recommendation for approval from the ADR for the Costello's pool project. Thank you to Dan and Brad for your time.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.
Now on to the last project, One Winding Way. Patrick, would you like to present?
I would love to. So yes, our final development project being presented today is the project proposed for One Winding Way. If the address sounds familiar, it's because there's already a project on this parcel. It's a approximately 1 acre lot, and it's a relatively flat lot located on the intersection of Winding Way and Laurel Grove. There's a previously approved it's a major renovation with an ADU and significant landscaping under construction currently at this address. The proposal is to take there's a lawn area located. It's on the left-hand side of this diagram. I'm not sure if that's the western portion of the parcel or where the north is here, but the lawn area that you can see on the left portion of this schematic would then have a pool located in it. The pool would be conformant to setbacks, and pool equipment would be located in an enclosed space underneath the residence. So this would trigger the requirement for design review typically, in that there'd be more than 50 cubic yards of excavation. There's no need for a variance because the pool is outside of the setbacks. But because there's already an approved design review project, staff is looking at this as an amendment to the approved design review. In which case we take it in front of the ADR group. We establish the public noticing for this project so we can alert neighbors that the project is changing. But depending on the guidance for received tonight, staff would then just make an administrative decision as to whether or not to approve this change to design. So this would not continue forward to the council for a decision. It's being treated as an amendment to the existing approved design review. Since we noticed this item, no comments have been received from the public. And again, staff is requesting that the ADR group provide feedback on the merits of the project. And yeah, in this case, there's not going to be a formal recommendation to town council. It'll be an administrative decision by staff based on the comments received from ADR tonight. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. Would anyone from the project like to make any comments?
I would be happy to briefly introduce it if anyone had any questions. Basically, we're just adding on to the back of the dining terrace a pool and a lawn area. It's artificial turf. We are already removing, I think it's like 3,700 square feet of impervious surface. So even taking back this, we're still reducing the previous condition by over 2,500 square feet. And it's all just kind of minor and low and keeping with what was already there. The lot's sort of already covered in trees everywhere. It's very well screened. So it doesn't really impact anyone that we can tell. And I think ADR all had a chance to visit. We staked, we apologize for the piles of dirt in the backyard. We weren't aware that we need to stake so quickly. So it looks a little higher than it is. It's really down a grade. So I'll just leave it at that unless anyone has questions.
All right. I'm sorry, Greg, are you the owner, the architect?
Sorry, I'm the project architect. David Riley's the owner. He's present as well. And Scott and Janelle are on too. They're the landscape designers.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
is David.
Sorry.
I'm here if anyone has questions for me as well.
Hi, David.
Hi.
Okay, does anyone from the ADR have any questions for the design team? Okay, I will open it up to the public. Is there anyone in the public who has any questions or comments? No? Okay, I'll go first to Pool. I'm fully supportive of the project. And as a side note, the house looks beautiful. I think you're gonna have an amazing home when you're finished with it. Looked very nice. Your construction worker did a beeline with me through the house to the pool. Looks gorgeous, nice floor plan.
Thank you.
Sorry, who would like to go next?
I can go. I fully support it as submitted. And then I don't know if this is the right forum to say this, but Patrick, I would be supportive of somehow excuse if pools are conforming in terms of setback. I'd be in favor of making a carve out in the cubic yardage situation such that it would not have to, that it could be administratively approved if that's something that's appropriate and we could bring up in another format or talk to council about. But anyway, if it's conformant, then I don't think we need to see it in this kind of format. But that's a comment for our procedures, and I can support the project as submitted.
Thanks, Stephen.
I also am in support of the project. I wasn't on the design review when the original project was approved, so I actually thought that it was part of the original designs, but something had changed. So I think it makes sense where it is. Yeah, looks good.
In.
Great. Mark, Joey?
Yeah, I can support it the same light as the rest of the board.
Same, I support it as designed, and I would suggest that applicants don't have to go through this time and expense for something that is completely compliant with all setbacks. If we can figure out a way to fast track something like this, I think it's a great project. It's wonderful. It's in the right place. Go.
Great. Well, we have unanimous approval. Thank you very much for your time and good luck with the rest of your project.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Matthew and Patrick too. They've been super helpful moving it ahead quickly. Based on your comments, same idea, move it through if we can. It's super helpful. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Enjoy.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no conceptual advisory design review. Are there any communications from the staff other than the next meeting time of May 17th?
Only that we briefly mentioned previously, there's a lot of major projects moving forward right now in the town. We just had a workshop last week regarding the proposed flood improvements to Corte Madera Creek. There's a questionnaire online just to, and you can get to it from the main Town of Ross website. Basically trying to get a feel for the communities. There are two main options being looked at in the EIR that's being prepared for this flood improvement program. One is the preferred project, which would take Frederick Allen Park, which is the park that runs behind the businesses along the common, and taking the creek out of the channel and creating more of a creek access park in that area. The one downside of that would be that it'd be substantial tree removal, and we probably wouldn't get the same shading from the canopy for 10 to 20 years after the replacement trees are planted. But we would have access to the creek and modest reduction in rare storm flooding events. Then an alternative that's being considered is doing nothing to the park and making all of the improvements within the channelized portion of the creek, which would still give significant flood reduction, but would leave the park as is. So we're looking for some feedback from the community. So there is this questionnaire that's online and available to be taken right now.
So Patrick, can I interrupt you for a second? So I took that survey, and I did not attend the meeting, so that's my fault. But in looking at the survey, it's a little unclear. The way it's worded is you have option A, which is the best for floods, and then option B, which is almost as good for floods, but costs a lot less and has less construction. But it'd be nice to know what that delta was. Is it the type of thing where you have a 90% improvement and a 92% improvement? Because as a layperson who hasn't been to the meetings, it's hard to know, because it just says they're essentially the same when it comes to flooding. It's sort of how the questionnaire is worded. It might be better if it was a little more explicit, the difference in the flood mitigation of the two options.
Yeah, that's a valid concern for information. We had to decide, how much information to include and how much not to. And so for most storm events, you will not see a difference between those two projects. In the rare, 100-year storm, you will see flood risk reduction with the preferred project with option A, or with the project that the county is proposing. So with the alternative that's just in the channel, in most storm events, you won't see a difference in the flood risk reduction, but you will in some of those. And the information is available, but yes, it's not in the survey. So there's definitely a little more research that could be done into what's presented.
So Mark, just to state, I sat through the most recent town hall meeting, or the meeting. It's complicated like that. It would be nice if it was a singular number, 10% more, 10% less. As Patrick is alluding to, it gets pretty complicated based on the 20, 50, and 100-year storms and the impact on certain properties associated with those. I have a feeling that the town decided to really boil it down to some simple terms, which may leave some people curious and uninformed. But I just, having listened to that, it is complicated to some degree.
Okay.
There is a wealth of information online, so if you want to spend the weekend reading through the EIR, you're welcome to it.
I voted for more flood reduction.
So that's one project. We're also preparing a request for proposals for the town hall, the public safety building reconstruction. So town hall itself, that the historic building will not be touched, but redoing our fire department, paramedic, and police department buildings, and then creating space for administrative, so I don't have to work out of a trailer anymore. That project is moving forward for bids for that master plan. We've selected a consultant, Gates and Associates, for the Ross Common improvement master plan. So we were just out there this week doing a walkthrough of the site. So that's something that we're really going to be pushing for public engagement. So this group will be one of the resources that we use to really get feedback from the community on how that project should look. So yeah, some big public projects that are moving forward right now, and we're looking for as much community input as we can get.
Hey, Patrick, some of us on the review board have been through the common redesign that was 10 years ago or so, and I know documentation on that, et cetera. Joey, I know you're smiling. It might be worthy of thinking how we engaged in that process and whether or not that was good or could be improved, or just to give you some guidance. We had a workshop, I believe, at the town hall where we were introduced to the project, and we added our comments pretty early on in the design of that, I think. Joey, I don't know if you have anything else to say, or anyone else.
Yeah, I will say similarly, I almost have a little bit of a groan inside of me, because we spent an inordinate amount of time going over these master plans for Ross and the parking in front of the post office. And then remember, Mark, there was also that whole San Anselmo corridor with the parking, and it was all this money that was going to come in. And we actually spent a ton of time on this. And then I don't know what happened. The money went away, or it dissipated, or the whole thing blew up. But like, it's time. It takes a lot of time to review these things. If this money is not certain, or if it's not really going to happen, I'm a little more reticent this round to spend a ton of time reviewing and opining on these things that are just kind of pie in the sky.
Well, we do have a non-competitive grant to pay for the master plan, and we do have the improvement budget in our town budget. So the master plan can be implemented. And yeah, most of the staff at town hall were not around for that initial take on this project. So the institutional knowledge that you folks have would actually be very welcome. So I can look through minutes and things like that, but actually hearing from people that participated is a lot more valuable.
Well, it's just more like, is this even reality? To me, now I look back on that, and it was just a big dream session. So I caution us spending a ton of time on something that's just not really ever going to get funded.
I think, Patrick, what maybe to put a finer point on that is keep us in check with what is funded, and the pie in the sky ideas, we can put off to the side in a parking lot, so to speak, of ideas for the future. And then we focus on what can be actually constructed, and we have funds for within reason. I think the other point was most of those drawings were lost. We had previous folks look for them, and I think with the turnover at staff at times, those have all those things, Joey, that we were looking for are literally gone. There's not a plan left that
seriously. And it's like, it's free time we're all giving to this. So let's just make sure it's really actually real.
But great projects to be involved with, Patrick. I think that we're game.
Yep.
Yeah, we are game.
My enthusiasm is not dampened.
Good.
No, let's just see if there's money there. Okay, what's next, guys?
Okay. Thank you. Next is adjournment.
Hey, Mark, can I make one quick, I wanted to just catch something on the Lagunitas project that Patrick stated. I want to make sure that we're all in agreement that we didn't really make a decision on the tree removal recommendation or not. And then I know Stephen had a comment, I think it was Stephen that said that he wasn't in favor of the in-kind sort of payment. I think that was Stephen said. I didn't know if you captured a consensus on anything related to the trees on that particular project, other than the gate widening. I think we got that consensus. I know it's an important piece, and I don't know if we really all gave it a thumbs up or down one way or the other. So I think it might be worthy of just clarifying that for you for the minutes.
Yeah, so what I did not find that there was a consensus on what to do with them, but I did find that in general, the ADR group was okay with the removal of those redwoods. And then there were, yeah, certain comments that we would take into account, such as making sure that they're replaced on site versus through in lieu payments. So that's
Is that accurate?
kind
Are
of
we
takeaway I got.
supportive of the redwood removal? I wasn't certain that.
Well, I appreciated very much, Mark K, your deep dive into.
Yeah, sorry, that really
I
pissed
was
me off.
loving
You're
that.
so
I was-
dishonest.
I was totally loving that. And it was such a bust. It was great. But I knew it was gonna be a long meeting. I just wanted to get on the architecture, which I thought had more problems. But there's some stretching of the truth going on there with the redwoods, etc. That said, I think a lot of redwoods are really not to be cherished. There's so many of them, they're a real nuisance at times. So I don't know how we should proceed with that.
But I don't know that we should, I mean, Mark was fine to help clarify it, but we shouldn't open up the topic again.
Right.
I just
yeah,
wanted to
I-
clarify anyone's
Yeah.
opinion to make sure that Patrick had the right point in the
Yeah.
minute. That's all I was.
It seemed like we were a little mixed on that. Well, we wanted to see new architecture. And
Yes.
we didn't really come to a consensus on the redwoods during it.
I think that's where I was kind of thinking we just didn't have a consensus on the removal of those redwoods. We did all agree that they should be counted accurately and marked accurately, to Mark's point, but I didn't get a consensus on, oh yeah, that's fine to remove them. And that's what I just want to clarify,
Same.
Patrick.
Yeah, I would agree with your assessment.
Okay. Yeah. And then and everyone's welcome to email us privately with your thoughts on the, if you think of something else, we can take that into account. It won't be a decision of the ADR. It'll be your individual input, but we're open to that as well.
Appreciate that.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, Patrick. And thank you, everybody, for your long evening. Looks like we
Janelle.
have some more coming up.
Hi, I was wondering if you're gonna reveal who the arborist is. I'm an interloper. I'm Joey's neighbor and a landscape architect, but who's?
Oh,
the
yeah, well,
arborist?
it's
You gonna
it's
tell
on the
us?
town website. It was Art Tyson,
Art Tyson.
who is both he's
Janelle,
a
if you go,
historian, arborist, economist, home appraisal expert,
Expert on all.
psychology.
if you go to the ADR page on the Town of Ross's website, each
Okay,
report is available. So the 210 Lagunitas report includes that arborist's report.
okay, thank you very much. It's always good to know these things. Great meeting,
All right.
everybody.
Good
Thanks
meeting.
for letting me join.
Bye. See you
Okay,
soon.
bye.
All right,
Bye.
all right. Oh, so
Hey, what's up,
I
guys?
I moved that we adjourn the meeting.
Wrap it up.
Second that.
Someone,
Third.
thank you.
All right.
All right, that was a long one. Thank